AnRep3D. What is it and what does it do? AnRep3D is an abbreviation of Annual Reports Visualized in 3D. The tool generates graphs, three-dimensional graphs, from values found in annual reports. This is an example of an annual report. Public companies issue them every year. This is another example of an annual report, a more complex one. And in the annual reports, values are found for the balance sheets, especially total assets and the stockholders' equity, sometimes just called equity. And there's also a profit and loss statement or statement of operations showing, for instance, the revenue and the net profit. From these values, AnRep3D generates a graph, and this is an example of such a graph for British Petroleum, in this case BP. The width of the graph represents the equity we already showed in the example of an annual report, or an excerpt taken from the annual report. The depth is representing the total assets, and as we know, equity combined with total liabilities creates total assets. The equity will almost always be smaller than the total assets, so the front view of the graph will be not as large as the side view. But that's the balance sheet. We also have the height of the building, and this represents the revenue, the total revenue, and a part of the revenue will be the profit. Most of the revenue is absorbed by the cost to obtain the revenue, but a small part is called profit, and here it's a very, very small part. We can hardly see it, but it's green, and that means it's a profit. The roof could also be red, then the costs are even higher than the revenue, so on top of the revenue there will be a red roof showing a loss. We'll come to that. So again, this size represents the equity from the balance sheet. This, the depth, represents the total assets from the balance sheet, and the height of the graph represents the total revenue, with a green or a red roof representing the net profit or net loss. If the graph shows a very tall building, it means that the revenue is high compared to especially equity from the front view. If it's more or less a stub, then the revenue is very low compared to the equity. So the revenue and the profit are shown in relationship to the balance sheet, and also two parts of the balance sheet can be shown in one graph. But it would be very useful if only one building was presented in the graph. It's meant to compare different companies and a company in time for several years, but we took this one because it's easier to explain what the graph shows. And actually our demo, our free demo, shows one building to illustrate the principle. Now let's take an example of a couple of companies compared to each other. For all equity, total assets, revenue and profit, the green roof, or the loss, red roof, are shown.